toxic people don't always destroy you loudly. Sometimes they slowly convince you to doubt your own value. In today's story, a woman ignores red flags for years because she believes love means patience and understanding. But one unexpected discovery reveals something terrifying. Her husband had been secretly tracking her success while resenting her for it at the same time. This is just a relationship drama. It's a chilling look into manipulation, insecurity, and emotional control.
For our anniversary, my brother David gave me a custom digital frame. He said, "So I can always send you new photos of the family." My husband, Leo, never liked it. "It's a security risk," he'd say. "Another screen spying on us." He kept unplugging it, but I always plugged it back in. Until one morning I woke up and the screen was black. As I was trying to fix it, my phone buzzed. It was David. "Elena, forget the frame. Grab Mia and get out of the apartment right now. I'm on my way." I just stared at the phone. "Before we continue, thank you for being here. I'd love to see where you're all watching from in the comments below. It means a lot to know who's listening. And just a reminder, this is a fictional story created to be shared. Any resemblance to actual people is completely coincidental, but the feelings are all too real." Our bedroom was quiet. When I woke up, the city lights still faint through the blinds. I rolled over and squinted at the digital frame on my nightstand. The screen was dark. That was wrong. It was always on, a soft glow of family photos cycling through the night. My first thought was the power cord. I fumbled behind the nightstand, fingers tracing the wire to the wall. It was plugged in tight. I pressed the power button on the back once, then twice. Nothing. The screen stayed lifeless and black. I tried a different outlet on the wall, thinking maybe a fuse had blown. Still nothing. Inside the drawer was just a jewelry box and a book on modern art Leo gave me last month, back when he was still trying to show he cared about my work at the gallery. But the frame remained dead. I stood up and glanced at myself in the bedroom mirror. My reflection seemed distant, a stranger in a life that suddenly felt unfamiliar. My gaze drifted back to the dark screen on the nightstand. For 2 years, that frame had been the first thing I saw in the morning and the last thing I saw at night. Seeing it dark felt wrong, a small but unsettling break in the routine of my life, and a cold anxiety started to creep in. I pulled my robe tighter and went to the bedroom door. Across the hall, my daughter Mia's door was slightly ajar. I could see the soft pink glow from her little reading lamp. She was fast asleep, her breathing slow and steady. She was only 6, blissfully unaware that something in our perfect home felt broken. I needed to protect that innocence. I was still watching her when I heard Leo's footsteps coming down the hall. He appeared, holding a tray with my breakfast, walking with that calm confidence of a man in complete control. On the tray was my favorite porcelain mug, the one I bought at a gallery in Soho. Hot steam rose from the black coffee inside. He'd made it for me every single morning since we moved in together. He knew I couldn't function without it. I used to think of it as one of his small, devoted gestures, the kind of quiet habit that builds a marriage, piece by piece. He smiled when he saw me. It was that charming, easy smile, the one that made me fall for him in the first place. He had this way of looking at me like he'd won a prize. Such a sincere expression. "Morning," he said, placing the tray beside the bed. "I thought you'd still be sleeping." "The frame is broken," I said, my voice flat, watching his face for any flicker of a reaction. He paused for just a bit, then walked over to the nightstand. "The frame?" he asked, echoing my words while his mind clearly raced. He picked it up, turned it over, and fiddled with the cord. It was a solid performance, but unconvincing. Someone actually trying to fix something has a different energy. The body reveals what words are trying to conceal. After 10 years as a curator, I know how to spot a fake. You learn to see the tiny inconsistencies beneath a perfect surface, the hesitation in a brushstroke that betrays the forger's hand. And Leo Sterling wasn't trying to fix the frame. He was studying me, gauging my anxiety level. Looks dead, he said, setting it down. Maybe there was a power surge. Did you call your brother about it? It was working fine last night, I said calmly. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders, his fingers finding the exact knot of tension at the base of my neck. He always knew just where to press. He remembered every little detail I ever told him. For 5 years, I thought that kind of focused attention was love. It's just a gadget, Elena. David can get you a new one. Or I can buy you something more elegant. Something that actually fits our home's aesthetic. He delivered that line with a warm, patient smile, the kind that suggested my fondness for my brother's gift was sweet but unsophisticated. Something that fits our aesthetic. That was his favorite phrase. He was constantly curating my life, improving my choices until my own original taste felt like a distant memory. His touch was firm, knowing. It was always so perfectly executed. For years, I believed that precision was a sign of his deep affection. But standing there with his hands on my neck and the frame mysteriously dead, I saw it as a form of control. You're right, I said, forcing a smile. It's probably nothing. I pulled away gently, making it look like I was just reaching for my coffee, not flinching from his touch. I'll text David about it later. He nodded, pointing to the mug. Drink your coffee before it gets cold. I have an early meeting. He walked out. I stood perfectly still, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I walked to the dresser and picked up my phone. The screen was lit with a single notification. Once missed call from David. I slipped into our walk-in closet, closing the door behind me, and called him back. He answered instantly. Elena. His voice was tight, stripped of all its usual sarcastic humor. It was the voice of a man issuing a command. My brother, David Chen, had fought off cyber attacks for Fortune 500 companies and testified before Congress. I had never once heard a trace of fear in his voice. Not when our dad got sick. Not when he lost his first big client. Not ever. But I heard it now, a tremor in his voice that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I need you to listen to me very carefully. My knuckles were white from gripping my phone. David, what happened? Why is the frame dead? I killed it, he said. There was a pause and I heard him exhale slowly, trying to sound calm. I shut it down remotely. The frame has a back door I built in it, streams ambient audio to a private server. It's a security protocol. Elena, I have a recording from last night. You need to hear this. Now, the closet suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in. And I mean that literally. The dark closet, smelling of cedar and Leo's expensive cologne, felt like it was spinning. It's that feeling when you learn the foundation of your entire life is a lie. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep my balance, my fingers digging into the cool plaster. Play it, I whispered, but my heart screamed, please don't. Please tell me this is a prank, that the frame just malfunctioned, and this is all some terrible mistake. But David played the audio file. And the first voice I heard belonged to Leo. I need to explain what was so deeply wrong with his voice, because my mind fought to reject what it was hearing. It was Leo's voice, the same cadence, the same timbre I'd heard for 5 years over expensive dinners, during quiet Sunday mornings in the darkness of our bedroom. The same voice that would explain complex financial markets to me until I fell asleep. It was him 100%. But the person behind the voice was gone. All the warmth, the charm, that playful tone he used when he wanted something, it was all stripped away. The voice on the recording was cold, detached, like a consultant outlining a hostile takeover. He'd reduced me to a logistical problem to be managed. The dosage needs to be right this time. I'll tell her it's the new single origin blend from her favorite cafe. She trusts the coffee. She always trusts the coffee. My stomach dropped. I felt dizzy, sick. Then a second voice joined his, a voice that made my blood run cold. Isabel, my mother-in-law, the woman who called me the daughter she never had, who said I was the only person who truly understood her son. On the recording, her voice was sharp and impatient, the voice of a business partner. Make it strong enough. She can't fight back or even talk when they arrive. And Liam, have those trust papers signed before she can think clearly. This is our only chance. I know, mother. Liam's voice on the recording was sharp, irritated. The documents have been ready for 6 weeks. And the child? His mother's voice was low, as if she couldn't say the word. What about Mia? She stays. She has our insurance if things go wrong, but they won't. A short pause. By the time Elora can think straight to call for help, it will all be legal. My knees gave out from under me. I grabbed a rack of clothes to hold myself up, my knuckles turning white. Hangers clattered loudly in the closet, and I covered my mouth to stop a scream. My eyes were burning, but I couldn't cry. Not now. Not when Liam was just outside with a tray, with the tea he was going to use to drug me. I forced the tears back until it hurt. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were breaking. 4 years. For 4 years he'd held me close, telling me I was safe. 4 years of him whispering, I love you, and I will always be here to protect you. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks he had those papers waiting, and Mia's name. He used my daughter's name as if she was just leverage. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just fear or rage or heartbreak. It was all three crashing together to create something else, something cold and sharp, something that knew what to do next. Elara. My father's voice suddenly broke through on the phone call, sharp and urgent, the raw instinct of a parent trying to protect his child from halfway across the world. Listen to me now. Don't grab jewelry. Don't pack a bag. You can't let him know that you suspect anything. I need you to get Mia and leave that apartment immediately. Dominic is waiting for you on your street, just 2 blocks from your building. Dad. My voice broke completely. I bit down on my cheek to stop myself from sobbing. Elara, please. I had only heard my father, Arthur Vance, say please 2 other times in my life. Both times it meant the world was falling apart. Now go get your little girl. A knock came at the closet door. 3 slow, patient knocks. 3 knocks from a man who knew he had all the time in the world, because he thought he had already won. Then Liam's voice came through, warm and familiar, the voice I'd trusted for years. Elara, honey, your tea is getting cold. Are you all right in there? My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it through the door, past the dresses, through 4 years of absolute lies. My hands trembled. My legs felt like they would give out. The weight of our entire marriage, a marriage I thought was real, was suffocating me. I took a single deep breath. I found that quiet, calm place deep inside me, the one I go to when a delicate art restoration is on the verge of disaster, and one mistake could ruin it forever. It's where my hands become steady and my focus narrows to a single point. I went to that place and shut the door. I'm fine, I called out. My voice was warm and steady, perfectly normal. Just trying to find my favorite sweater. I'll be right out. I disconnected the call. I pressed my hands against my thighs for 3 seconds until they stopped shaking, my face becoming a blank mask. Then I opened the closet door and smiled at the man I married. It was the greatest acting job of my life, and it bought me precisely 3 minutes. That was all the time I needed. 3 minutes. I had already calculated it back in the closet, my heart hammering out each second. Liam would take the tea to the kitchen. He'd check his phone at the counter he always did and scroll his work emails, looking intensely busy. 3 minutes, maybe 4. That was my window to transform from the woman I was to the woman I had to become. I left our bedroom with a cardigan over my shoulders, my voice completely casual, as if I'd just thought of a quick errand. Every step was measured. One loud noise and everything would be over. I'm just going to step outside for a little walk, I said, pausing at the end of the hall, for some fresh air. This headache has been bothering me all day, and the cold might help. Liam glanced up from the kitchen. His face arranged itself into a look of concern, a smooth, practiced expression I recognized instantly. It was a performance. The small frown, the soft eyes, his body turning to face me. I'd watched him make that face 100 times and always believed it was love. Now, with that recording seared into my brain, I saw the cold calculation behind it. "I'll come with you," he said, putting his phone on the counter. "No, it's all right." I shook my head, giving a small, weary smile. "I just need 10 minutes of cold air. You know how I am. I'll be back before the tea is cool." I crossed the room, patting his arm as I went past a casual, familiar touch. "Go watch some television. You've been working all day." He held my eyes for just a moment too long. I met his gaze and didn't look away. I made my expression tired, loving, and completely blank of the truth raging inside me. He finally nodded. "Okay, but take your coat. It's freezing outside." "I will," I lied and walked to the door. I didn't take my coat. The second I was out of sight and heard the TV turn on, I moved. I didn't run. Running makes noise, and the bedrooms were close. I moved silently, like I do at my studio, when the artifacts are ancient and delicate. I knew a single mistake could shatter everything forever. I gently opened the door to Mia's room. She was sleeping on her side, holding a worn-out stuffed bear. Her dark hair fanned out on the pillow, her mouth slightly open in the deep, innocent sleep of a child who feels completely safe. A nightlight cast a warm, golden glow on her face. In that soft light, she looked so small, so unaware of the plot unfolding just one room away. Looking at her was almost painful. A part of my heart felt like it was ripping apart, and I had to press my hand to my chest. She felt safe because she didn't know about the tea. She didn't know her own father's plan. She didn't know that when she woke, the meaning of home would be destroyed. She didn't know the man who read her stories in silly voices had just referred to her as leverage. She was completely innocent. And right now, that was all that mattered in the entire world. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered, scooping her up in a motion I knew by heart. She was a heavy, warm weight in my arms, completely limp with sleep and trust. I pulled her blanket around her, tucking it under her chin and holding her close. She moved a little. Her eyes opened, still hazy from her dreams. "Mommy." Her voice was just a breath. "Shh." I kissed her forehead, my own eyes stinging so much I could hardly see. "We're going on a secret adventure. Close your eyes." "A secret," she murmured, and her eyelids closed with the pure trust of a 5-year-old who had never been lied to. That perfect faith almost broke me. I carried her down the hallway to the guest room balcony. Dead ivy clung to the iron trellis. I already knew how cold the metal would be. I had tested these same rungs yesterday, making sure they would take our weight. Tonight it was real. The iron was cold, hard, and solid under my hands. It was built to last. Mia's arms held my neck tight as I swung my leg over the railing, my foot feeling for the first rung. My cotton slippers were useless, and the metal felt like ice against my bare foot. The night air was cold and sharp, the first true sign of winter. I grabbed the trellis, adjusted Mia's sleeping weight, and took a deep, steadying breath. Then I started to climb down. Each step was a choice. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as I balanced my daughter's body with my own. Mia's head rested on my shoulder, her warm breath on my skin, and her fingers clutched my sweater. She never even woke up. She trusted my movements, the same way she trusted me with her life, without question, just because I am her mother. The second my slippers sank into the wet lawn, a sound tore from my throat that I didn't recognize. It wasn't a sob or a scream, but a sharp single gasp, my body finally releasing a pressure it could no longer contain. Mia's weight was a solid, warm comfort against my chest. The grass was ice cold, soaking my feet instantly. The air smelled of rain and damp soil, and the night was silent. Then, at the edge of the long driveway, a pair of headlights flashed twice. "Robert." I clamped a hand over my mouth, killing the noise that tried to escape when I saw his car. My legs were shaking so violently, I swear I could hear my teeth chatter. I had actually done it. I took a single step toward the light, and then the master bedroom window above me flooded with light. I didn't look back, I just ran. This was no longer a careful escape. This was pure, primal fear, carrying me barefoot across the lawn, clutching Mia, my slippers lost somewhere in the darkness. I reached the BMW and Robert already had the door open, his face set with a look I hadn't seen since he faced down corporate raiders in court. It was the expression a man gets after staring into a deep abyss and deciding to fight it anyway. "Get in," he said. And I did. He slammed the door shut, and the car was moving before I had even buckled my seatbelt. "Robert." My voice was a thin, ragged whisper. Mia shifted in my arms, making a soft noise of protest. I rubbed her back gently, and I tried again. "Robert, the lights, do you think he saw us?" He saw the porch light flick on. "Then, the bedroom," Robert said, his gaze fixed on the road, his grip on the steering wheel the only thing keeping him steady. "He'll check Mia's room first. By the time he knows for sure, we'll be on the interstate." He let out a sharp, controlled breath. "Dad has had a man inside the building as security office for the last hour. Julian is not going to be able to follow you." The sob I had been swallowing since I hid in the closet finally exploded out of me. It was a single, ugly, wrenching sound that I had no power over. I buried my face in Mia's soft hair. Squeezing her so tightly, she whimpered and squirmed in my arms. I forced my arms to relax. I forced myself to take a breath. Mia settled down again, heavy with the incredible resilience of a sleeping child, and I just sat in my brother's car, tears streaming down my face as the dark world blurred past. 4 years, I whispered. The words felt like poison in my mouth. "Robert, for 4 entire years. I know." His voice was strained, holding back a mountain of rage. He brought me a cup of chamomile tea every single night. I pressed my fist against my mouth, trying to stop my jaw from shaking. Every night for 4 years, he made it exactly how I liked it. He knew I didn't like sugar on weekends because of my migraines. My voice just disintegrated. It took me a moment to find it again. He was putting sedatives in my tea for the last month, and I drank it. I thanked him for it, Robert. I told him it was the kindest thing he did as my husband, Claire. He said my name, and it sounded like a crack in the ice. He cleared his throat. "I swear to God, I will make it my life's mission to ensure that man never has another moment of peace." "Get in line," I said, and the sound of my own voice startled me. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by something colder, something with a sharp edge, the kind of clarity that comes when your training has taught you that discovering the damage is just the first step. What you do about it is what matters. Mia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, a bit more aware now. She looked up at me in the passing glow of the highway lights, her face shifting from sleepy confusion to the simple truth that Mom was here, so the world was safe. "Mommy, you're crying," she said, lifting her small, warm hand to my cheek. The noise that escaped me was half a laugh and half the deepest wound I've ever known. "Just a little bit," I told her. "But I'm okay now, sweetie. I promise you." "Did you get a boo-boo?" she asked, studying my face with the intense focus she reserved for things that were truly important. Not the kind of boo-boo a kiss can fix. I turned my head and kissed the center of her palm. She smelled like baby shampoo and that uniquely comforting scent of a warm, sleeping child. I held on to that smell like a lifeline. "Go back to sleep. We're almost at Grandpa Arthur's house now." Her eyes flew open with the pure, unadulterated joy that only the name Grandpa Arthur could inspire. "With Jasper?" "With Jasper," Robert confirmed from the front seat, his voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard before. Mia made a tiny, happy sigh and buried her face in my shoulder again. Within a minute, her breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. I just stared out the window. The dense city lights were beginning to thin out, replaced by the darker, faster stretches of the highway. Somewhere back in that city, Julian Sterling was walking into his daughter S' empty bedroom. I looked at the back of my brother's S head. How many of Dad's partners are working for us tonight? All of them, Robert said. Every single one. This story is just getting started, and it's going to get intense. To show you're on Claire's side, please type the number 1 in the comments. And be warned, some of the following events have been dramatized for the narrative. If this story is too much for you, now is your chance to turn it off. But if you're ready, let's face this next part together. The huge wrought iron gates of the Vance family estate closed behind us with a heavy, final thud that I felt deep in my bones. It was the sound of a sanctuary sealing itself from the world. It meant you are safe now. Whatever was out there can't reach you in here. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for days. The main house was lit up, every window on the ground floor a warm beacon in the night. I saw my father's outline in the grand entryway before the car even stopped. Robert came around to open my door. I stepped onto the gravel driveway holding Mia, who was now awake and staring at the sprawling mansion with wide, sleepy eyes. For her, this wasn't a fortress. It was just Grandpa's house, a magical place filled with secret gardens, and her beloved cat, Jasper. My father, Arthur Vance, was waiting just inside the door. He didn't speak at first. He is 68, with the unbending posture of a man who built the country's most feared law firm from nothing. But when he saw me standing on his marble floor, in a cheap bathrobe and bare feet, clinging to his granddaughter, his stoic expression just crumbled. He crossed the foyer in 2 long strides and pulled us both into a fierce protective hug. He held on with the desperate, raw power of a father who had been listening to his son's frantic updates for hours, completely powerless to help his only daughter until this very second. "You're safe now," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick and cracking. My own eyes began to burn again as I pressed my face into his shoulder, just holding on. "I'm safe, Dad." We stood there for a few heartbeats. Then Arthur pulled back, cleared his throat, kissed my forehead, and shifted into the man I'd known all my life. The man who converts fear and pain into strategy and action. "The doctor is waiting for you in the library," he said, taking Mia from my arms as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Mia immediately grabbed his lapel. "Grandpa, where is Jasper?" she asked, her voice filled with a child's unwavering priority, and Arthur replied, "In the den, sweetheart, waiting for you," with a calm that I knew was costing him dearly. He carried Mia down the hall, and I followed. A woman in dark blue scrubs stood by the library, her medical kit open on a table. "Her name tag," said Dr. Eva Rostova. "Claire," she said, her voice calm and competent. "This will just take a moment. Your left arm, please." I sat down on the edge of a leather armchair, rolling up my sleeve on autopilot. As the needle went in, I heard Mia's delighted shriek of "Jasper" from down the hall, followed by a cat's contented, rumbling purr. That simple, ordinary sound of joy made my chest ache. I bit my lip hard, focusing on my breathing until the feeling passed. "All done," Dr. Rostova said, taping a cotton ball to my arm. "We'll have the results in 8 hours, a full toxicology panel." 6 if it's possible, I said, "please." She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. 6 it is, she confirmed. The library had been transformed into a war room. My father, Arthur Vance, was at his massive desk with 2 laps open, a yellow legal pad covered in his sharp handwriting, and an old half-empty mug of coffee. He was a man who looked like he'd decided. Sleep was an inefficiency he couldn't afford. He looked at me over his reading glasses with a look that said he'd been preparing for this war for years. "Claire," he said, "I want everything," I said, my voice steady as I sank into the chair across from him. His properties, his investment portfolio, his shell corporations. Everything Julian Sterling thinks he owns. Arthur simply slid one of the laptops toward me. I pulled it closer and opened the first file. My father's forensic accounting team had been ruthlessly efficient. 5 years of Julian's financial life, all sorted into encrypted folders. I started to navigate through them with the cold precision of a former analyst hunting for the fatal flaw in the code, picking it apart piece by piece. It took me less than 20 minutes to find the system's heart. Apex, the predictive analytics model his entire real estate empire was built on. The one he sold to international consortiums as his own untouchable genius. My legacy, Davies, I said, and my voice was sharp, without a tremor. He looked up, knowing that tone in a woman meant the pleasantries were over. The original prenuptial agreement. Schedule C, paragraph 4. Can we enforce it tonight? Davies put his pen down. Show me what you have. I spun the laptop around so he could see the screen. It's the Aura Tower, I said. I created those blueprints. He's been passing them off as his firm's, and tonight I'm pulling the plug. Davis reviewed the contracts and the prenup, his eyes scanning every line twice. He was the kind of lawyer who triple-checked everything, building an ironclad case. I'd learned long ago that patience with him paid dividends. He scrolled through a document, then scrolled back to the top. He took off his reading glasses, polished them on his silk pocket square, and placed them back on his nose. The prenup, he said finally. Schedule C, paragraph 4. You're certain the intellectual property rights are explicitly reserved to you. I drafted that paragraph myself, I told him. My lawyer at the time said I was being difficult. I said I was being careful. There's a world of difference. Davies almost cracked a smile. Almost. Give me the exact wording. I recited it from memory, like the foundational principles of engineering or the weight-bearing capacity of steel. Some things you just know because they are the bedrock of your life's work. All proprietary designs, conceptual models, and architectural plans developed by Isabelle Moreau prior to or during the marriage shall remain her sole property, licensed for use by Vance Properties on a project-by-project basis, subject to her express written consent. The license for any design is revocable at will, with immediate effect upon written notification of a breach of terms. My father had come into the study while I was talking. He stood by the bookshelves, arms crossed, and when I stopped, he said, his voice resonating with pride, "That's my daughter." I felt a lump in my throat and looked back at the laptop before the emotion could crack my resolve. "Davies," I said, "how fast can you file the injunctions?" "They're already filed," Davies said, turning his own laptop to face me. "I drafted them the minute you called." He paused. "I've been your family's counsel for 3 decades, Isabel. I know how you think." The documents were meticulous, sharp, and absolutely brutal. They identified the Aura Tower project by its city permit number. It cited our prenuptial agreement, chapter and verse. It listed all 7 of the multi-million-dollar developments currently using my designs as their cornerstone, from the luxury condos in Soho to the new corporate headquarters in Midtown that used my sustainability concepts. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that as of this moment, all work was to cease immediately pending a review of intellectual property rights. I read it, then unlocked my phone and texted a number I hadn't used in almost a year. Leo. "It's Izzy Moreau. I need you. Time to follow the money." The reply came back in less than a minute. "Knew this was coming. I need a few hours. I'll get you the wire transfers showing every payment he diverted from your accounts, every forged signature on the contracts, every blueprint he filed under his firm's name instead of yours. You'll have it all, Izzy." There was a short pause, then another text. "I'm just sorry it took this long for someone to finally call him out. He's been taking credit for your vision since that first big hotel deal." Something inside me fractured, not grief, not triumph, but the clean, sharp relief of finally being seen by someone who knew the truth and had been powerless to stop the lie. I set my phone down on the polished mahogany desk, placed my hands flat on the cool surface, and took a deep, Steadying breath. He's on it, I told Davies. Excellent. The lawyer turned his laptop back and attached 2 more files, his fingers moving with practice speed. I'm adding my firm's official notice and the signed prenuptial agreement as exhibits. This is going to Julian S. corporate account, the legal teams for all 7 developments, and the NYC Department of Buildings. All at once, he looked up at me. Do you want to review the final filing? No, I said. I want him ruined. Davy simply nodded. He angled the screen towards me and moved the cursor over the e-file button. Then he sat back, giving the final move to me, because he understood that some victories have to be claimed by the person who was wronged. I clicked the mouse. The timestamp on the screen read 1:21 a.m. The filing shot through the digital ether, landing in 7 corporate servers, 2 city government agencies, and one man's personal inbox. In a few hours, when the markets opened, Julian Vance's entire real estate empire would be frozen solid. He had no idea, of course. He was somewhere across town, probably schmoozing at some charity gala, or maybe calling his latest assistant in a panic, wondering where I was. He was doing all that, completely oblivious that the very ground beneath his penthouse was about to give way. I stared out the study window at the city lights. My reflection was a faint outline in the glass, and beyond it the endless Manhattan night. Enjoy the view, Julian, I thought. It's the last time you'll see it from the top. I got maybe 3 hours of sleep on the sofa in the study, my jacket pulled over me, my phone on the rug where I feel it buzz. At some point, my father Henry came in and draped a cashmere throw over me without making a sound. The gesture was so much like him, quiet, protective, and profound that when I woke up and saw it, my eyes burned for a moment before I forced it back. It was 7:48 a.m. My phone showed 92 notifications. I sat up, tapped the first one, and saw what my husband, Julian Vance, had posted online at 6 a.m. While I was sleeping here, and our daughter Lily was safe in my childhood bedroom down the hall. The picture was from last year's Met Gala. We were on the steps of the museum. Julian in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his hand possessively on my back, the two of us sharing a private laugh. I remembered that exact second. Someone had just complimented my dress, and Julian had whispered a joke in my ear. It was a real smile, a genuinely unguarded moment, which made it the perfect tool for his deception. The caption read, "Last night, my pregnant wife, Isabel, suffered a severe mental health crisis and left our home. She isn't answering her phone. She's been struggling with her anxiety, and I am desperately worried for her and our unborn child's safety. Izzy, my love, if you're seeing this, please just know how much I love you. Come home. The penthouse feels so cold without you." The TV news host looked on with deep concern. The online comments were a flood of sympathy. "What a wonderful, caring husband. We're praying for her recovery. This is just heartbreaking." I was watching on a tablet when my brother Ben walked in with coffee. He saw the look on my face, took the tablet, watched the segment, and let out a string of curses that made our golden retriever, Gus, jump. "Ben," I hissed. "Lily's just in the next room." I know where Lily is. Ben's jaw was tight, his knuckles white. He handed the tablet back. He used the photo from the Venice trip, Izzy, the one from your birthday. He's using that picture to paint you as unstable. I know, Ben. You can't just let him get away with. He cut himself off, raking a hand through his hair. "Please tell me you have a plan to fight this." "I'm going to fight," I promised him, "but I'm not going to do it his way." Lily's soft footsteps in the hallway were the only warning before she appeared, wearing a princess nightgown, her blonde hair a tangled halo. Gus immediately trotted over to nudge his head against her leg. She looked from me to Ben with that radar all 5-year-olds have for grown-up stress. "Why is Uncle Ben's face all scrunchy?" she asked. "Uncle Ben does not have a scrunchy face," Ben said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was just thinking really hard about traffic patterns. "Come here, you little monkey." He scooped her up and she giggled, grabbing onto his shirt. I watched them, my heart a tight knot of love for my family and raw fury. The combination was almost unbearable. "Mommy," Lily said, now settled on Ben's hip. "I saw Daddy on Grandpa's news show." He looked sad. Why was he on TV? The room felt like it was spinning. I put my coffee cup down, went over, and cupped Lily's small face in my hands. I poured all my strength into that one look. Her eyes were the same shade of hazel as Julian's, a constant, piercing reminder, and my love for her was an inferno that could burn everything else to the ground. "Daddy is dealing with some complicated grown-up things," I said gently. "But that's not for you to worry about. Your only job right now is to go find Grandpa Henry and convince him to make his special chocolate chip waffles." Her eyes lit up. "With the whipped cream? Go on. You're the only one he's powerless against." She immediately squirmed to get down. Ben set her on the floor and she and Gus took off down the hallway, a tiny whirlwind of chaos that simultaneously broke and healed my heart. I turned back to Ben. He wants a public fight, a messy media spectacle. I shook my head. He'd win that. It makes it about drama, not about the truth. I picked up my phone. "I need you to find the doctor who signed this medical letter he's showing everyone. Find out who paid him." Ben came back to the study that afternoon, his laptop open, and his face told me everything. His face was a mask, his eyes burning with the cold focus of a hacker chasing a ghost in the machine. "Found it," he said, sliding the tablet across my desk. "Landon Hayes runs a high-end investment firm downtown called Apex Holdings. Huge money, very private. He paid a consultant to file a risk assessment on you 3 weeks ago." He tapped the screen. "Claims you had 2 meetings, March 10th and March 22nd. The dates just floated there." A wave of cold washed over me. "March 10th, I said. "I was in New York for the gallery opening of my biggest client. There are pictures of me all over the art blogs. I was there the whole weekend." "I know," Marco said, his voice low. "I saw the posts. March 22nd. My voice was tight, thin. "You and I were at Mom's birthday dinner at that Italian place she loves. We sat there for 3 hours while she told stories about our childhood. And you kept trying to steal my cannoli." Marco let out a short, bitter laugh. "It was a good cannoli, Maya." "I know." I leaned on the desk, the smooth glass cool under my palms. I was not in some downtown high-rise on March 22nd. I was watching you fight a pastry. I pulled the tablet closer and opened the full risk report. So this Landon guy either faked this whole thing or someone gave him bad information. I started reading the summary and my stomach dropped. It listed everything in cold corporate language: erratic financial decisions, emotional volatility, impaired judgment on major acquisitions, and an inability to manage our family's portfolio. My fingers felt numb. It wasn't just shock, it was a profound, chilling cold. I knew every point on that list. I'd been feeling so scattered for weeks, blaming stress and the brutal market forecasts. "Marco," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't get it." He was already typing, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he froze. "Oh no." He angled his screen towards me. "A holding company owned by my husband Robert. It made a monthly payment to an online pharmacy for a custom prescription." I staggered back from the desk, bumping into a bookshelf. I couldn't breathe. My chest was too tight. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. He was building the case against me before he even had a reason. "Marco." He was documenting the symptoms before he was even causing them. It was a business plan. I choked on the word. Marco was suddenly there, his grip firm on my shoulders, holding me steady, the way you grab someone who's about to faint. "Maya, breathe. Just breathe." I looked up, and his face was tight with a rage I had never seen before. His jaw was a hard line. I had never seen my brother look so dangerous. "He planned it," I whispered, forcing the words out. "He drew this up in his office like a corporate takeover. He found the drug. He bought the consultant. He fabricated the proof. And every night he came home, kissed my forehead, and asked if I was feeling overwhelmed by the family finances. A noise tore out of me, a strangled sob. He asked if I needed help, Marco, every single night. My brother just wrapped his arms around me and held me while I shook. There was nothing left to say. I let myself shatter in his arms for maybe a minute, a violent, ugly cry that I desperately needed to get out. Then I stood up straight. I scrubbed my face with my hands. I picked up my phone. Anne needs all of this, I said. Every document. And I want Landon Hayes' firm named in the very first motion we filed. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Anne. Maya, she said, the private investigator just sent his report. You need to see this. I was already grabbing my keys before she finished. The phone pressed to my ear. Meet me at the office, she said. He found something at the house. I was in my car before we even said goodbye. The law office felt airless, or maybe it was me, filled with a sharp, metallic fury. Anne was standing by a conference table, a single manila folder placed in the center. My sister-in-law, Chloe, was there too. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, her expression grim and protective. Just show me, I said, my voice flat and hard. Anne looked at me with a quiet sympathy, the look of a lawyer who knows that sometimes the facts are the only thing that can cut through the pain. The hair analysis confirms chronic exposure to a complex neurotoxin, Dr. Chen said. They tested 3 centimeters. It shows a consistent low-dose pattern over roughly 21 days. 21 days. I counted backward automatically, my mind snapping open a calendar and filling the dates. 3 weeks ago, I almost fainted during Lily's ballet class, blaming it on exhaustion. The instructor had to help me to a chair. 3 weeks ago, I completely missed a major client presentation, one I debuilt myself, and sent a bizarre, rambling apology I barely remember typing. 3 weeks ago, I told myself the dizzy spells and memory fog were just pregnancy brain. I had to get more rest. 21 days, I whispered. My voice was steady. That steadiness was the most terrifying thing in the room. The blood work also shows trace amounts from the last 48 hours, Dr. Chen added, which means he didn't stop. She met my eyes. He was still giving it to you the night you left. The tea. That special calming blend he always brought me, served with that gentle, concerned smile. The tea that sat getting cold on my nightstand while I climbed down a fire escape in my socks, with my daughter asleep in my arms. Across the room, my father made a choked sound. It was small and tight, the noise someone makes when they take a punch they never saw coming. He turned to the window, one hand pressed against the glass, and just stood there, his back rigid. And I knew he was doing the same math I was, replaying all our calls from the past 3 weeks. The family dinners, the times he'd asked if I was okay, and I'd just said I was tired from work. Dad, I began. Just a moment, Chloe, he said, his voice thick and unfamiliar. Just give me one moment. I gave it to him. I looked back at Dr. Chen. Lily drank that tea with me sometimes, I said. My heart was a fist hammering against my ribs, against my throat. She would always ask for a sip from my mug. I need her tested, please. Right now. Dr. Chen was already on her feet. I drew a precautionary sample from her last night, just in case, she said. I put a rush on it the moment you mentioned the nightly tea. The results just came in with yours. She held my gaze. Lily's tests are negative, Chloe. She is completely clean. The sound that came out of me wasn't human. It was a raw, ragged sob that ripped its way out. I gripped the back of a chair, bent over, and just let the relief tear through me. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. My legs gave out, and the relief was so huge, so violent, it felt exactly like being broken. She's okay, I gasped out. She's okay. She's 100% okay, Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle now. My father crossed the room and just laid a hand on the small of my back, a solid, grounding weight. I stayed hunched over that chair, just breathing, until the tremors stopped and were replaced by something else, something cold and sharp and heavy. I pushed myself up. I wiped my eyes. I looked at Leo. I want that entire toxicology report certified, I said. Every page notarized. And I want the charges amended. I took a breath that burned. Marcus Vance wasn't planning to hurt me. He was actively poisoning me for 3 solid weeks. That's not conspiracy. It's not just an attempt. I picked up the folder from the table. You add attempted murder to the file, Leo, because that's what this is. Leo started writing immediately, the pen scratching across his notepad. Just one other thing, he said, not looking up from his notes. The emergency restraining order was approved an hour ago. He can't come within 1,000 feet of you or Lily. He put the pen down, and Chloe, 3 of his biggest collectors have already voided their acquisition contracts this morning. The word is getting out. I stared at the report in my hands. 21 days. A block of time that would forever be a scar. Good, I said. Don't stop. I had designed the cybersecurity for our Lincoln Park penthouse myself, years before Marcus and I even got married. It was a professional tick, the reflex of someone whose entire career is built on anticipating threats on what happens, valuable assets when no one is watching. The central node was a custom build, a sleek, sculptural piece of brushed metal on the bookshelf that looked like modern art. It was a convenience. Marcus never bothered to examine closely enough to spot the pinhole camera integrated into the design. I opened my laptop and pulled up the secure server. I hadn't looked at the live feed since the night I ran. I wasn't ready to see that space as a crime scene. But this morning, I was. The feed took a few seconds to connect, then the image snapped into focus. Isabella Rossi was on my sofa. She was curled into my corner of the sectional, shoes off, legs tucked beneath her, like she'd done it 1,000 times. She was wearing an expensive-looking silk blouse, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. She was holding a mug, lifting it to her lips with an easy grace that screamed ownership. It was a hand-thrown ceramic mug with the small crack near the rim. My mug, the one I'd bought on our first trip together. It was the cashmere throw I curled up with every night. The one that had moved with me from our first tiny apartment to this glass house in the hills. My chest felt tight. Julian walked out from the master bedroom. He had on that faded college sweatshirt he always wore at home, the one with the paint fleck on the sleeve from when we decorated the nursery. He sat down next to Chloe on the sofa. She sank into his side, her head on his shoulder, a gesture so practiced it was automatic. In my house, on my furniture, while I was supposed to be broken. She's gone completely silent, Julian said, rubbing his temples. No calls, no angry texts. Nothing. That S not a good sign, that S a bad one, Chloe answered. She rested her glass down on our coffee table right on the polished mahogany, leaving a perfect wet ring. A wave of pure rage washed over me, so hot it made my vision swim. Of all the betrayals, that tiny act of disrespect felt so deeply personal. Silence means she's planning something, Chloe continued. Who does she have on her side? Her brother. Her father's whole company. Julian's voice was strained, trying to sound calm and failing. And she has Adam Sterling. Chloe sat bolt upright at that. Sterling, the asset forfeiture guy? Yes, Julian, she snapped, all the cozy charm vanishing from her voice. That is extremely bad. Sterling doesn't do divorce settlements. He orchestrates corporate takedowns. Julian pressed his palms into his eye sockets. I know. Then we have to get ahead of it, she demanded. We need to control the story. We find an old friend, a business rival, anyone who will say she's always been unstable, that she's been on the edge of a breakdown for months. She grabbed his arm, her voice low and sharp. You have to paint her as crazy before she gets the chance to show a single person a shred of proof. And what if she already has proof? Julian S.'s voice was barely a whisper, and a chill ran down my back. It was the sound of guilt. It was the sound of a man calculating his odds. Chloe just scoffed. What could she possibly have? She left in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase. She has her family's money and a wounded ego. That's it. She picked her wine glass back up and took a long, slow sip. There is absolutely nothing she can throw at us that we can't spin into our favor. My hand trembled as I slid my finger across the laptop's trackpad, but it wasn't from grief. It wasn't even from anger anymore. It was that cold, sharp clarity you get when someone underestimates you so completely it's almost a gift. She didn't know about the private investigator. She didn't know about the offshore accounts. She didn't know about Adam Sterling or the meetings he was having with the state's attorney general. And she definitely didn't know that every single word she was saying was being recorded by a hidden camera and streamed to a secure server right here in my brother's office. She saw me as the victim. She had no idea I was the one setting the trap. I clicked the small record icon and watched the red dot blink on the screen. Then I turned to my brother Owen, who was standing right behind me, his eyes glued to the monitor. He looked like he had stopped breathing. "Owen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I need you to find me the best art forger on the West Coast. I need someone who can replicate 3 specific impressionist sketches in the next 48 hours, so perfectly that only a chemical analysis could spot the fake." Owen just stared. He looked from the live feed back to me. Chloe had just knocked my grandmother's porcelain bird off the end table and onto the hardwood floor. A dark, quiet fury settled over his face. "I'll have someone for you in an hour," he said. The forger Owen found worked from a quiet studio near Sausalito. A man named Mr. Alistair, who had spent 30 years making museum-quality replicas for private collectors and film studios. When Owen showed me his work, I saw a copy of a Monet study that was so flawless it gave me chills. The brushwork was exact. The way he'd artificially aged the canvas showed a level of mastery that was truly breathtaking. "Tell him I need 3 pieces ready by Friday," I instructed. "I'll send the high-resolution images tonight. The copies need to feel old, not just look old. Truly authentic." I disconnected the call. While Julian was scrambling, I drove to the family estate and went to the art vault, the climate-controlled sanctuary that held my father's private collection. 50 paintings, collected over a lifetime by a man who loved art more than anything. I stood there in the silent, cool air, and the pain I felt was deeper than the fresh wound of the last few days. It was a quiet, familiar grief. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I promise I will protect what you built." Then I pulled out my laptop. Julian never had access to my work email, but my personal one he'd insisted we share a calendar years ago, a gesture I'd once found romantic. I composed a message to our family's art advisor. I attached a file with images of the 3 most valuable sketches. Then I typed the message, thinking about getting a new appraisal for Dad's collection. Some of these pieces could be worth millions now. I put the advisor's name in the recipient line and my own in the BCC field. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, resisting the urge to see if Julian had read it, because that would feel too real, using my father's legacy as bait in a trap for the man who was trying to destroy me. Owen walked in holding his phone. He had that look, the one that meant our plan was working even better than we'd hoped. "That new high-rise project just lost its primary investor," he said. "And Amelia, the quarterly reports are public. 2 more of his biggest partners pulled out this morning. Atlas Holdings and Pacific Crest Group." He showed me the stock ticker on his screen. Those 3 investors represented nearly 70% of his liquid capital. I just stared at the numbers. "He'll be desperate by this evening," I said. "He's already there," Owen said, switching to the live feed from my house. The living room looked dark in the late afternoon light. Julian was pacing back and forth, something I'd never seen him do. He was always so deliberate, so calm. Calm was power. Pacing was panic. Chloe was on the sofa, watching him with an intensity that said she was finally realizing how much trouble they were in. 3 investors in a single day, Julian was saying, his voice tight. This isn't just bad luck. Someone is actively working against me. It's Amelia, Chloe said, her voice flat. It has to be her. She doesn't have those kind of business contacts. But his voice cracked on the word contacts, and I knew he didn't believe it. Deep down, he always knew I wasn't just some wealthy wife. He knew what my family was capable of. His phone chimed on the coffee table. He snatched it up. He read the screen, and I saw his face shift through 3 distinct emotions in less than 5 seconds. Confusion, then dawning awareness, and finally, a look I recognized all too well, pure, uncut greed. Amelia just emailed our art advisor, he said, his voice slow. Chloe got up to look over his shoulder. Her eyes widened. A full appraisal of the collection? She looked up at him. How much money are we talking about? Her father's sketches, Julian said quietly, almost to himself. The last time they were appraised, the big 3 were valued at just under 20 million. The greed on his face was no longer a flicker. It was a blazing fire. Chloe's hand gripped his arm. Julian, she whispered, $20 million would fix everything. The bad loans, the investors, all of it. We could just disappear. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked back at the phone. I need to find out where she keeps the official ownership papers. I watched the whole thing from Owen's office, my hands folded calmly on the desk, my breathing slow and even. The bait was in the water. The hook was set. I felt the precise moment it dug in. Owen, I said, call the estate manager. Tell him to have the fake provenance documents ready by morning. The forger delivered the 3 counterfeit sketches on Friday, wrapped in archival paper and packed in temperature-controlled cases. His caution told me he understood the value of what he was transporting, even if he didn't know the real reason. I met the courier at the service gate myself. When I opened the first case, the drawing inside made me gasp. It was my father's favorite, a charcoal study by Degas. The paper was aged perfectly. The glass in the frame had that slight, almost invisible waviness of antique manufacturing. The replica was so perfect that my professional instincts took over, and I started scanning for the tiny flaws, the tells that separate the authentic from the fake. It took me a full minute to find one. This is magnificent work, I said. The forger, Mr. Alistair, was a small man with paint-stained fingers and the calm demeanor of someone who didn't need praise. The signature was the hardest part, he said. Getting the pressure of the charcoal just right took all of Thursday, but I believe they'll pass inspection. They'll pass, I said. Thank you. After he left, I took the fakes down to a secondary storage room and opened my own case. Inside were the trackers, each one the size of a grain of rice, sealed in a tiny device made to look like an archival tag. I had designed the system in grad school as a way to prevent the theft of rare artifacts. The tags use a combination of GPS and motion sensors to know exactly when an item is moved. Once activated, they transmit their precise location and an asset number, second by second. With the same care I would use to handle the real thing, I attached each tag to the back of a frame, hidden beneath a replica inventory label. My breathing was even, my hands perfectly still. David appeared in the study doorway as I sealed the 4th tracking chip. He watched me for a second, his version of intense focus. He finally said, "Your father sketched out the first draft of this system. Did you know that?" "I know," I said without looking up. "You showed me his notebooks when I was 16. He would been proud of this," David added softly. His voice was a blend of respect and grief, and I just tightened my jaw and kept working. Yesterday, I drove to the SFPD to see Detective Harding in the Major Crimes Division. He was in his late 40s, sharp, with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much. I placed the Aegis tracker and the file on Ethan's financial fraud on his desk, and he scanned it all silently. Then he met my gaze. "So you're telling me you plan to be the star witness," he said. "I am telling you, I am the evidence," I shot back. I just need a warrant unsigned and your unit ready to go. These chips give you a live location, a suspect, and a felony in progress. All you have to do is show up. He studied me, debating if I was a genius or just dangerously overconfident. Then he just said, "Give me the tracker IDs." I pushed the list of serial numbers across the table and he began to type. The forged inventory manifest our contact created listed the correct collectibles and their values, but it pointed to a decoy locker on a lower unused level. The actual fakes were in a secure vault under my name. And the real collection? Already tucked away in a bank downtown, safe until this nightmare was finished. Ethan arrived at the storage facility on Thursday morning, just after 10. The manager called me the moment he read the name. "He says he's acting on your behalf," he whispered. I said I needed your direct confirmation, but offered him the public inventory list. He was there for 10 minutes, took pictures of every page. "Perfect," I replied. Did he seem confident? A brief silence. He looked like a guy who thought all his money problems were about to be solved. I thanked him and hung up. For the next 36 hours, Alex and I were glued to the monitors in the study, watching the feeds in shifts. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, like we were nursing someone through a fever. Then, Friday morning at 8:15, the exterior camera picked up a black cargo van pulling into the rear loading bay. Alex was on duty. He knocked twice on the study door, our signal. I was already moving. On the screen, a man in a dark hoodie got out, holding a large, reinforced case. He moved quickly, without a trace of hesitation. He walked like a man who had rehearsed this exact moment. At the rear service door, he keyed a code into the digital lock. My birthday, which he'd stolen from me years ago with a promise it would be his special password too. He pressed enter. The lock beeped green. "Detective Harding," I said into my phone. "He's inside." He was in there for 6 minutes and 41 seconds. I know, because I counted every last one. The internal cameras showed him moving through the lower corridors with the cold precision of someone who had memorized the blueprints, which he had. For 3 days, he'd obsessed over that fake manifest, planning a route from the fire exit to avoid the front desk completely. He had really done his homework. It's funny, for a man who couldn't be bothered to assemble a single piece of furniture in our 5 years of marriage, Ethan Thorne could be incredibly detail-oriented when millions were on the line. I watched on the screen as he popped the locks on 3 different display cases, his tools looking brand new. I saw him gently slide each jersey into a padded sleeve from his bag. He was fast but careful, treating them with a reverence he never had for the sport itself. The irony hit me like a physical blow. He handled my father's fake memorabilia with more respect than he ever showed my father's actual daughter. 6 minutes, 41 seconds. That was it. He sealed the case, hoisted it over his shoulder, and slipped out the fire escape and into the van. "He's moving," Liam said from the bay window where our command center was set up. His voice was flat, his professional voice, the one he used to wall off his feelings. Heading south towards the Embarcadero. My phone was already in my hand. "Agent Bell, he's mobile. Black van, south on Stockton." Her voice came back calm and controlled. "We have him. We've had a visual the whole time. We're letting him complete the deal." "We need the exchange on tape," she explained. "Understood," I said. "The chips will ping the instant they're sold." I hung up and pulled the GPS feed live on my main monitor, and there they were, 5 bright green dots, moving in a neat cluster through the city. Ivy spent more than a decade staring at screens like this. But this was the Aegis Sentinel system I built, tracking these exact items for this one reason. The feeling was strange. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the crushing pressure right before a dam breaks. Liam pulled up the buyer's camera feed. The buyer's warehouse near Fisherman's Wharf was a classic grey market setup. Not exactly illegal, but definitely off the grid of the official collectibles circuit. Mikhail Petrov ran the show there. I knew his name. In my world, you know the guys who move high-end items with questionable histories. Our video feed was perfect because I'm the one who designed their security network 4 years ago. And guess what? They never bothered changing the master password from the default one I set. Mikhail Petrov was already inside, waiting when Ethan walked in. Petrov was a heavy-set man in his 60s who looked at everything like he was calculating its resale value. He watched Ethan place the case on a felt-lined table, projecting the air of a man who bills by the minute. "Let's see it," he grunted. Ethan opened the case, revealing the first jersey. Mikhail pulled out a magnifying glass, leaning in to inspect the stitching. His face was unreadable, but he tilted his head a professional tell I knew well. 2.5, Mikhail stated, for the lot. "These are worth 4 million. Easy," Ethan argued. His voice was tight, but he was holding it together. "I need 3.2. Mikhail stood up straight. "No, you need a buyer who doesn't talk. That's what you're paying for. 2.5. Final offer." I watched Ethan's jaw clench on the monitor, even from 50 blocks away. A sharp, clean feeling washed over me. Not sadness, not even anger. Just the cold, mechanical certainty of a trap springing shut. 2.5. Ethan choked out. They shook hands. On my laptop, 5 green dots instantly flashed a brilliant, furious red. An alert box exploded on the screen. Aegis Sentinel Priority Alert. Illicit transfer confirmed. Location, 19 away, San Francisco. Suspect identity confirmed. Registered owner, Clara Elizabeth Vance. Notifications deployed to the FBI Collectibles Crime Unit and SFPD Financial Crimes. Case ID SFCCR 2051019. My phone buzzed before the alert box even disappeared. Agent Bell was straight to the point. "We are moving in now." I could hear the raid team shouting in the background, a wave of controlled chaos over the phone. Behind me, Liam finally let out a breath, a long, shaky sound. "Clara," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he'd been holding back for months ever since that night I slipped out of our house in my pajamas. "It's done. He's finished." I just stared at the 5 red dots on the map, each one an item my father had cherished. Each one was a silent alarm, broadcasting Ethan Thorne's exact position to the federal agents. My whole system was designed to protect the things I loved. "Yes," I whispered, "he is." The all-clear call came at 4:46 p.m. Liam had gone to get coffee and returned with 2 mugs, his phone, and a new look on his face. Not shock. It was the expression of a marathon runner who had just crossed the finish line and finally let himself fall. "They have him," he said. "Ethan and Mikhail Petrov. Both are in custody." He said they secured all 5 items and froze the wire transfer before it went through. He placed a mug in front of me with delicate care, as if it was the only object he could focus on. "It is over, Clara." I looked down at the mug, at my own hands. I'd always thought this moment would feel like a tidal wave of relief. That first gasping breath after being pulled from under the water. But it was quieter than that, heavier. Like putting down a weight you've held for so long your own body has warped around it, and now you have to learn how to stand up straight again. "What about Chloe?" I asked. "She wasn't on site," Liam said, but Bell confirmed they have Ethan's phone. Encrypted texts between them go back over a year. He sat across from me. "They're bringing her in tonight." Just then, Robert came into the study. He had the quiet air of someone who'd been listening from the hall and was done pretending he wasn't. He just looked at me for a long moment, his eyes wet. He walked over and took my face in his big, gentle hands, just like he did when I was a little girl, and he kissed my forehead. "It's finally done," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Not quite," I said, but I let myself lean into his hands for just 3 seconds. I needed that. I'd earned it. 40 minutes later, Mr. Hayes arrived. He was holding a thick manila folder that was straining against its rubber band. He placed it on the table and sat with me and Liam. He wore the grim expression of a man who was about to deliver a very, very painful invoice. The forensic accounting team finished their audit this afternoon. He said, the model. I need to walk you through these findings before we file. It's a lot to process. Go on, I said to our lawyer Ben. He opened the file. Between January of last year and this August, Pierce Financial made 23 separate wire transfers. They were between $50,000 and $110,000 each. The total comes to $1.5 million. He turned the page. Every single cent went to one bank account held by an LLC called JR Ventures. I knew what JR stood for the same instant Dominic did. I heard his breath catch. JR, I stated. Jessica Reynolds. Jessica Ann Reynolds, Ben corrected. She's the sole owner. Formed the shell company in Delaware 18 months ago. The LLC has no website, no business filings, no clients, nothing. It existed only to receive these funds. He set the document down, his eyes meeting mine over the top of his glasses. $1.5 million, Clara, siphoned from the company's investment profits and paid directly to his mistress, from the company running on the trading algorithm you designed. The money my own system generated was funneled by my husband directly to her, using a loophole he engineered just for them. My chest tightened with a feeling that wasn't grief, and it wasn't just rage, either. It was the awful clarity of finally understanding the true depth of the betrayal. Like restoring a priceless painting, only to step back and realize it was a complete fake. Where did the money go after that? I asked. Ben flipped a page. Most was used to buy a piece of real estate, a 4,000 square foot penthouse in the Gold Coast. Purchase price $1.2 million. All cash. The title was held jointly. Dominic Pierce and Jessica Reynolds. He paused. The deed was officially filed this March. March. That was 8 months ago. While I was working 16-hour days at the firm, perfecting the new code for the international launch, calling him every night, and he'd tell me he was so proud of me that he was keeping dinner warm. While I was running on fumes for our future, he was signing the deed to their new life. A sound escaped my throat, not a sob, not a laugh, just a dry, brittle snap. The sound of something breaking for good. Dominic's hand shot out and squeezed mine, hard. The pain was a welcome anchor in the storm. How many more charges are we looking at? I asked, my voice completely level. Corporate embezzlement, Ben said, ticking them off on his fingers. Wire fraud, money laundering, because of the shell company. And that's just the financial side. The DA is pushing for conspiracy charges, Clara. This is far beyond a simple divorce case now. It's criminal fraud. Good, I said. Do it. I want everything filed, every single bank record, every text message, all the P. ICE reports, every scrap of paper the doctor gave us. I want Dominic's whole rotten empire on the district attorney's desk by Monday morning. It's already being messengered over, Ben assured me. My phone buzzed against the table. I glanced at the screen. Catherine Pierce. I just let it ring. 3 times, 4, 5. Her name glowed there, an unwanted guest. The woman who called me her perfect daughter at every charity auction for 4 years. The woman who organized his life down to the socks in his drawer. I stared at her name on the screen and felt absolutely nothing. The ringing stopped. I flipped the phone over, face down. What time does the DA's office open tomorrow? I asked. 9 a.m., Ben replied. Then I want that entire file on his desk by 8:50, I told him. I don't want a single page missing. The main gate buzzer rang at 10:16 the next morning. I was in the conservatory with a cold cup of tea, reviewing the asset declarations with Ben when our head of security, a steady ex-cop named Garrett, appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Pierce is at the front gate, he said. She's on foot, no car. She has just been standing there on the sidewalk for the last 20 minutes. I looked up from the legal pad. Ben simply raised an eyebrow. Is she alone? I asked. Yes, Mom. I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. Then I said, let her in. Put her in the formal sitting room. And Garrett, give me a minute before you show her inside." He nodded once and disappeared. I slipped a hand into my pocket, quietly activated the recorder on my phone, and slid it back in, leaving the microphone clear. Ben saw the entire motion. The corner of his mouth ticked up, not a smile, but it looked like approval. "I will be in the library if you need me," he said, picking up his briefcase. "Stay close," I said. The woman who entered the sitting room was not the Catherine Pierce I'd known for 4 years. That Catherine was impeccable, always in sharp business attire, a woman who dominated rooms with her precise memory and even more precise insults. This woman looked like she had been crying all night long. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot. Her hair was a mess, and her expensive wool coat was buttoned crooked, causing it to hang askew. Her hands were shaking so much she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She saw me standing by the window, and her whole face just seemed to collapse. "Sarah," she said, her voice thin and ragged, "please, I know I have no business being here, I really do." But there was nowhere else I could turn. "Sit down, Eleanor," I said. I used her name on purpose, erasing the formal Mrs. Vance that had always defined our relationship. I needed her to get it. The power dynamic between us was over. "There's a bottle of water right there." She sat but didn't drink. She just wrung her hands in her lap, her eyes puffy and pleading. The look of someone who has witnessed a catastrophe and can't unsee it. "He is my only son," she whispered. "I know what he did. I know it all now. The other woman, the forged paintings, the money, every last bit. And I know you have every reason to want to see him ruined." Her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together hard, trying to keep control. "But I am begging you, as one woman to another, as a mother to a woman who is about to be one. You understand what it's like to love your child so much that it blinds you to everything else. I am asking you for mercy." "Tell me what you knew," I replied. She flinched. "Eleanor," I repeated, my voice steady, my face unreadable. "You drove all the way out to my house. You waited at the end of my driveway for 20 minutes. If you are here asking me for something, you will give me the truth in return, all of it. What did you know, and when did you know it?" She squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, the performance was gone. All I saw was a tired, ashamed person who suddenly looked a decade older. "He told me his tech company was collapsing last fall," she began. "I knew he was in massive debt. I knew about Jessica. I actually encouraged it because Jessica was simple. She didn't have your family's history or influence. I thought Liam needed someone who would just admire him more than you did." She hesitated, and the shame on her face was impossible to fake. "That was wrong of me. I know that now. It was a horrible, cruel thing to do." "Go on," I said. "He told me his plan back in October." Her voice got quiet. "Not every detail. He just said he was going to make you take a break, that you seemed stressed, that you needed to be someplace quiet to recover for a while. He told me he had a doctor who would sign off on it." She stared down at her hands. "I asked him if the retreat was nice. I asked if it was a luxury facility, and he promised me that it was. And I believed him because it was easier." The tears were falling now, but silently, just sliding down her cheeks without the theatrics of someone playing a part. This was genuine. This was a woman finally admitting her own self-deception, seeing the ugly truth for what it was. "He mentioned the forger once," she said, "and that was the line that damned her. He said he had to get the copies perfect, that the switch had to be slow enough to look like nothing happened. I told him to be careful. I told him not to get sloppy." Her voice was just a whisper now. "I thought it was just swapping out a painting, something to get out of debt. I didn't realize what he was really." She couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't let myself realize. 6 simple words that explained the enormous gap between knowing a fact and truly facing it. "Eleanor," I said, speaking very slowly, "I need you to understand. What you just admitted that you knew about a forger, that you told him to be careful, that you knew he was planning to have me declared unstable. That's not just turning a blind eye. That makes you an accessory to fraud. I watched the blood drain from her face. You're going to need a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, someone else. Someone who represents you, not my father's interests. You should probably call them today. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. Are you saying I'm going to be charged? I'm telling you to hire an attorney, I repeated. Now, she looked as though the ground beneath her had just vanished. She sat frozen for what felt like a full minute. Then she started crying again, but it was a different sound, a low, helpless weeping, the noise someone makes when they finally see there is no way out of the wreckage they helped create. My phone vibrated. Sarah, it's Ethan, he said when I stepped into the other room. I just got a call from Liam's legal team. Liam wants to talk to you before the deposition tomorrow. He's requesting a private meeting. I looked back through the doorway at Eleanor Vance, who was sobbing into her hands, completely shattered. I turned my attention back to the phone. Set it up, I said. Official channels only. I want both of our legal teams in the room, and a court reporter transcribing the entire conversation. And Ethan? I want the final authenticator's report in my hands before I step foot in that office. The conference room at the law firm felt cold and sterile. The walls were a pale, depressing gray, designed to make you feel nothing at all. The huge mahogany table seemed to suck all the light out of the room. The chairs were black leather, and mine sighed when I sat down. Ethan was on my right. Liam's lawyer, a man named Reed, who already looked defeated, sat across from us. The space between us felt like a mile. The door at the far end of the room opened, and two paralegals brought Liam in. He had lost weight. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp, and he was sporting a few days' worth of stubble, the kind that says you've just given up. He wore a rumpled designer suit that now hung off his frame. He looked nothing like the man who had brought me tea just a week ago, and yet he looked exactly the same, because I was finally seeing the person who had been there all along. Eleanor Vance was already there, seated in a chair against the far wall. It was Reed's idea, no doubt, a pathetic attempt to project a united family. She sat perfectly still, hands clenched in her lap, her gaze fixed on the polished table. She didn't look at me once. Liam sat down. He stared at me for a long time. His eyes were red-rimmed, the look of a man who hasn't slept, or who's been crying. Or both. He placed his hands flat on the cold, dark wood and took a deep, theatrical breath, like an actor preparing for a big, rehearsed scene. Sarah, he started, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I have to say this. I need you to know that I see what I've done, and I am more sorry than I have ever been about anything in my entire life. Tell me, I said. He blinked, surprised. He had clearly expected a much longer silence before I would speak. The debt was crushing me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't think. And Jessica kept telling me it was the only way, that it was so easy. She got into my head, Sarah. I know it's a weak excuse, but she was the one who kept pushing. She found the forger. She drew up the paperwork for the conservatorship, everything. And the sale? I asked. He looked at me, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. I arranged it. Yes, I did that, but I never went through with it. I swear, I couldn't. The real paintings are safe in a storage unit. Every day I would think about it, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray you like that. His voice cracked perfectly on the last few words. The DA needs to know that. That needs to be on the record. I had a terrible idea, and I let it get out of control, but I never actually sold my wife's family heirlooms. He looked directly at me when he said it, his eyes glistening with tears he was holding back with the skill of a professional liar. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out the authenticator's report, already tabbed to the correct page. I placed it on the table between us. Then I slid it across the polished wood so it was facing him. Page 4, I said, Exhibit C. He glanced down. His lawyer Reed leaned in to look. The line read, "Forensic analysis confirms the money is a forgery. Wire transfers confirm the original was sold via a Swiss auction house. The transaction date was over 30 days ago. Bank statements confirm the payment was deposited into a shell corporation registered in your name." The silence in the room was so thick you could feel it. 30 days, I repeated, a whole month ago. The bank records show you were moving the money around the very night before I left you. I watched his expression as the facts landed. I watched those perfectly rehearsed tears finally spill, not from remorse, but from the pure shock of being trapped. "You just swore you couldn't do it." I pulled the report back and closed the folder. "You didn't even hesitate, Liam. You did it a month ago, for my grandfather's favorite painting. Every single day. That's not... He couldn't even put a sentence together. "That report is wrong. It's a mistake. The report was prepared by the top art forensics lab in the world, using methods admissible in any court," my brother Ethan said from beside me, his voice calm and firm with an authority that didn't need to be loud. "The chain of evidence is unbreakable. It will survive any challenge you can imagine." Liam's lawyer was already scribbling furiously on his notepad, his pen scratching like a man trying to draw a new map after his entire world had been bombed. Liam was just broken. His entire story was based on one lie, that he never sold the art, and I had just destroyed it with a single piece of paper. From her chair by the wall, his mother Eleanor made a small, sharp sound. A little gasp, like a violin string snapping under too much pressure. At some point, Isabella had laid a hand on Dominic's arm, a gesture of quiet support. Now, I watched her retract it, very deliberately, no sudden movements. She just drew her hand back, placed it in her lap, and stared at the marble floor. Dominic saw it. I watched his composure crack as he registered what it signified. I stood up. I slid the toxicology report back into my portfolio, snapped it shut, and pushed my chair in. I looked at Dominic one last time. "I suspect District Attorney is going to be fascinated by this report," I said. Then I walked out and didn't turn around. A raw wind howled in from the harbor the morning the trial started. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just that soul-sucking Boston gray that turns the whole world to slate. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment before going in. Not for some cinematic pause, but to feel the cold air sting my cheeks. I wanted to walk into that room by choice, not be swept in by the current of events. I wore a simple charcoal gray dress I'd owned forever, professional and understated. My hair was tied back. I wore no jewelry at all. The faint line on my finger where my wedding ring used to be had finally vanished a few weeks ago. Now, the blank space just felt like power. I didn't need his symbols to define me. The courtroom was a circus. The case had every element the media loves. Old Boston family, a stunning betrayal, a pregnant wife, and a scheme to have her institutionalized. 4 news vans were already idling outside. I walked past them without breaking my stride, and my brother Alex, who was right at my shoulder, has a look that tells reporters to think very carefully about getting in his way. We took our seats in the front row, directly behind the prosecution team. Alex gave my hand a firm squeeze under the table. That's all I needed. I sat beside our lawyer, put my hands on the table, and stared straight ahead. They brought Dominic in 5 minutes later. He was allowed to wear a suit for the trial. Someone had provided an expensive navy one that fit perfectly, but he'd lost so much weight it sagged at the shoulders. He looked, superficially, like the man I'd married. He had the same posture, that calculated confidence, but his eyes were wrong, so wrong I could see it from across the room. They were hollow, the unique emptiness of a man who has played his final hand and is just waiting for the dealer to collect the cards. The assistant DA, a razor-sharp woman named Ramirez, stood to read the charges. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, aggravated assault, and 2 counts of reckless endangerment, one for me, one for our unborn son. Each charge landed in the silent courtroom like a physical blow. I felt every single one. The sheer methodical cruelty of what he'd planned for the woman carrying his child. Dominic's defense attorney did his best. He tried to create a narrative of a man buckling under immense financial pressure, a momentary tragic lapse in judgment. He told the story of a venture capitalist facing ruin who made one awful mistake. He was a good lawyer with an impossible argument, and the jury gave him that blank, polite look of people just waiting for the inevitable. Ada Ramirez tore his entire defense to shreds during cross-examination with just a few pointed questions. She proved the scheme unfolded over 6 months and involved 3 different shell corporations, bribing a notary, forging my signature on legal documents, and a plan to liquidate all my family's assets. Does that, she asked the jury in her closing, sound like a man who just made a bad choice under pressure? Or does it sound like the cold, patient work of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing all along? The defense attorney had no answer. He just sat down. Isabella was the last witness the prosecution called. She had accepted a plea bargain in exchange for her full testimony, and she was dressed for the part. A plain black dress, no makeup, the very picture of regret. She sat in the witness box and answered every question in a quiet, firm voice that held no emotion. Miss Torres, the prosecutor asked, in your own words, what was the ultimate goal of this plan as Dominic explained this to you? Isabella looked right at the jury, not at Dominic. She said, he told me that once Clara was institutionalized, her power of attorney would give him full control over her inheritance. He said we would sell everything and move to the Cayman Islands. She paused. He said it like he was ordering an Uber. A quiet shockwave moved through the courtroom. The judge tapped his gavel. In the row behind me, I heard my brother Alex let out a long, ragged breath. I didn't look at Dominic while Isabella spoke. I just watched the faces of the jury as they took it all in. I saw their faces shift from confusion to realization, and finally to a grim, solid understanding. And my mind flashed back to myself, 5 years earlier at a ribbon cutting, thinking any man who could talk with such vision about creating a skyline must be a good man. The jury left to deliberate at 10:45 in the morning and returned at 1:30. The foreman, a quiet man in his 50s, read the verdict with zero emotion, like he was announcing train times. Guilty on all 8 counts. The judge scheduled the sentencing hearing for the next week. The district attorney insisted he was a flight risk with access to hidden shell corporations, and the judge didn't disagree. The sentence came down that afternoon, feeling like the final chapter of a book I already knew the ending to. Ethan Vance was given 20 years in federal prison, no chance of parole, and was ordered to pay back $10 million. His assistant Isabel got 5 years. The city official who took the bribes was disbarred and got 2. Our half-built penthouse on Lakeshore Drive was now government property. Vance Properties was handed to a bankruptcy court to be sold for parts. When the judge announced 20 years, Ethan made a noise. It was tiny, almost silent, a choked-off sound that contained the total demolition of every single thing he had ever designed, built, and lied to protect. He never looked at me once. He looked past me to the back of the courtroom where his father was sitting, and the expression on his face is something I will never try to put into words. Some things are just beyond language. He looked like a man who finally truly saw the damage he had caused and knew none of it could ever be undone. Mr. Vance sat in the last row, staring at his own hands. He didn't flinch when the sentence was read. He never even looked up. A bailiff walked across the room and snapped handcuffs around Ethan's wrists. The click of the steel was shockingly loud in the sudden, heavy silence. They walked him out through a side door. He passed less than 5 feet from my chair, So close I could have reached out and touched him. His gaze was fixed on the floor, his walk was mechanical, and then for a split second his stride faltered. It was a single tiny hesitation so small that only someone who knew his exact rhythm could have ever noticed it. Then he recovered, the heavy door swung open, and he was gone. I stayed in my seat as the courtroom slowly came back to life, as the murmurs from the gallery and the lawyers grew louder. I sat there saying goodbye to something, but not to Ethan. That was already done. The night I found the hidden ledger on his server, and my entire world came crashing down. I was saying goodbye to the woman I used to be, the one who needed his world to feel complete. The woman who measured her worth in skyscraper blueprints and charity galas, and never once bothered to check the foundation everything was built on. That woman was gone. I knew it the way you know a building is finally complete. Not with a huge celebration, but with the quiet calm of looking at the finished structure and seeing it for exactly what it is. I got up, picked up my purse, and headed for the doors. My brother Liam and our old mentor David were waiting on the courthouse steps in the biting Chicago wind. David had his coat collar pulled up tight, his hands buried deep in his pockets. And when he saw me emerge, he closed the distance in 3 long steps and pulled me into a hug, so tight I felt something in my spine just let go. He didn't say a single word, because there were no words left to say. Liam just watched us, his hands clenched, a muscle jumping in his jaw. When David finally pulled back, he held my face between his hands. He just looked at me for a moment, the way he always did when I was a kid, and I'd come to him with some scraped knee or bruised heart. "It's done," he said. "It's finally done," I echoed. The wind whipped around the 3 of us, a cold, indifferent gust that didn't care at all, the way Chicago wind always is. I just tilted my head back, letting the sharp, clean, real air hit my face. Then we walked down the steps as one. A week after the trial, I went to the Chicago PD evidence warehouse on Michigan Avenue. No Ethan, no Liam, no lawyers. Just me, a parking meter that was about to expire, and a gray afternoon that smelled of exhaust and the cold promise of lake effect snow. The officer at the desk was young, with tired eyes. He found the evidence packet in less than 5 minutes and pushed it across the counter with a release form. I signed it, broke the plastic seal, and poured the contents out into my open hand. The vintage gold watch fell into my palm, and some deep part of me recognized it, the way a frozen body knows the feeling of warmth. The gold was worn smooth on the edges, with the kind of patina that only comes from decades of being worn against a person's skin. The inscription on the back was exactly as I remembered it. There were 2 small scratches by the clasped thin angry lines where Ethan had tried to pry it open with a knife. I ran my thumb over them. "You okay, miss?" the young officer asked, his voice surprisingly soft. "I am," I said, and for the first time in years it was completely true. I was about to leave when the officer spoke again. "Oh, one more thing. A letter arrived for you this morning from a federal transfer center. The sender listed this as your contact address. Did you want it?" He held up a plain white envelope. My name was written on the front in a familiar script, that specific way he always made the C in Chloe. I took it from him. I found a bench near the entrance, sat down, and tore it open. The letter was 2 pages long, written on thin paper with a cheap pen. His handwriting looked smaller than I recalled, cramped and tight, as if he had very little room to write. "Chloe," it began, "I don't know why I'm writing this. I doubt you'll even read it. But there are things I needed to say that I couldn't say in that courtroom, with everyone watching us. I know you think every word out of my mouth is a performance, and maybe you're right, but I want to try, just once, to tell you the truth. When I first met you, I had no idea about your family's history in this city. I know how that sounds, but it's the God's honest truth. I just knew you were a genius. The way you could see a finished building in an empty lot, it was like watching magic. I fell in love with your mind, Chloe, long before I ever knew about the money. But then, somewhere down the road, knowing all of it, just it broke something in me. Not because I was greedy, but because standing next to you, I realized how small my own life had been. I felt like cheap imitation next to you, Chloe. A really convincing fake, but never the real thing. And I just couldn't live with that feeling. So I stopped trying to be good enough, and I just started taking. I know it's not an excuse. I know our daughter Lily will grow up knowing what her father did. That is a weight I can never set down. It's the one true life sentence I've earned, and I deserve it. But I just had to tell you that I did love you. Whatever that love became, whatever I warped it into to justify my crimes, it started as something real. I need you to believe that. I folded the letter. I held it in my hand. He was doing it again. Even from inside a prison with a cheap ballpoint pen, Ethan Vance was trying to rebuild the past. Not I betrayed you, but I was hurting. Not I chose to commit fraud, but your world was too much for me. The letter was a work of art, just like all his other constructions. It had just enough truth woven into it to make the lies almost invisible, unless you knew exactly what to look for. And I was looking. I walked to the trash can by the exit and dropped the letter inside. I didn't hesitate. I dropped it like you'd put down a hammer after the last nail is in. Then I walked out into the biting wind and fastened the gold watch around my wrist. The metal was cold against my skin for just a second, and then it started to warm up. I met my sister-in-law, Chloe, at the waterfront park like we planned. She was watching Mia for me while I handled some errands. In late fall, the park by the bay was mostly empty, just a few runners, and an old guy throwing bread to a mob of gulls. Mia saw me from 50 yards out and just lit up with that pure, explosive joy only a toddler can have. She took off across the damp grass like a little rocket, slamming into my legs with a hug, her cold nose pressed right into my jeans. "Mommy, we saw a dolphin," she shouted into my coat. It jumped right out of the water. Chloe laughed, walking up behind her. "I think it was just a big wave, sweetie." No, Mia insisted with the absolute conviction of a 4-year-old. It was a dolphin. A real one. She tugged my hand, pulling me over to the stone wall by the water. "Come on, maybe it will come back." "Dolphins don't really do requests, Mia," Chloe said, leaning on the wall next to us. "This one might," she said, not taking her eyes off the waves. We stood there for a bit, the three of us, while Mia made little clicking sounds at the water, which didn't bring back the dolphin, but did seem to impress the seagull guy. After a few minutes, Mia declared the dolphin had probably gone home for a snack and that we should do the same. And could we please get a warm pretzel, the kind with the big salt chunks on it? The ones with the little salt are just not salty enough. "The little salt is an insult to pretzels," Chloe agreed, totally serious. Mia nodded, exactly. She grabbed my hand and Chloe S., marching us toward the parking lot like she'd just successfully negotiated a major treaty. I looked down at her tiny, warm hand in mine, so certain that the person holding it would always be there to keep her safe. Back home, I walked into my office and pulled an old photo album from the bottom shelf. Our first year of marriage. I sat with it in my lap while the house was quiet. The leather cover was soft and worn from years of being looked through. I opened to a random page and traced the outline of his smile with my finger. The paper was cool and smooth. All the little doubts he'd planted in my head over the years were still there. But I wasn't going to tear out the pages. I realized something important from that time. The cracks in a foundation aren't just damage. They're the evidence, the story of what held up under the weight. The small locket around Mia's neck pulsed with a soft green light once every 30 seconds. I had checked the system that morning, and it pinged our private family server perfectly secure, just like it was designed to be. A silent, steady signal. My dad created the first one after my older brother vanished from a department store when they were kids. Dad never stopped preparing for the worst case scenario, and I turned it into a business. Titan security, the encrypted servers, the executive protection, it was all born from that one horrible day. I built fortresses for a living. I just never thought I'd need one for my own family. Mama. Mia came bouncing in, holding two mugs, her face flushed from the chilly air, absolutely glowing with the victory of getting extra sugary hot chocolate. I got you the one with cinnamon, she said. The best kind, I told her, smiling. Obviously, she replied, climbing onto the sofa next to me. She curled up against my side with that total, trusting weight of a kid who knows she is safe and loved and exactly where she's supposed to be. I held the warm mug in my hands and just took a breath, my daughter tucked in beside me, the city lights starting to twinkle outside our window, and I finally understood something I'd been feeling for months. Real security isn't something another person can give you. And love isn't just a diamond ring or a fancy wedding at a five-star hotel. It's something you have to build yourself. One choice at a time, one boundary drawn after another, the quiet, daily work of protecting your own heart. A siren wailed in the distance. The heat clicked on. Mia took a happy slurp of her drink. I took one of mine. The moment felt almost perfect. Now, looking back, I need to tell you what I wish someone had told me before my life fell apart. Jealousy doesn't knock. It doesn't send a warning text. It just shows up in your husband's browser history, open on his laptop, revealing a 5-year affair you never saw coming. Don't be like me. Don't wait for a signed confession to trust your gut. That little voice in your head that has been adding up all the late nights at the office and the vague business trips. That voice is never wrong. I'm not the hero of this story. This whole disaster taught me the only person I could truly count on was myself. And listen, the revenge was sweet. Exposing his secrets and taking half of his tech company felt pretty good. But the real victory? That was my daughter S. little hand in mine on a cold afternoon and the solid, unshakable knowledge that I had finally built a life that was completely and totally my own. I believe that certain people enter our lives to force us to become the people we were always meant to be. Our closest friends, a good therapist, and sometimes the stronger version of ourselves we have to fight to become. Stories of betrayal and family drama often end the same way with the moment someone decides they refuse to stay broken. At least, that's my take. Every story about getting justice begins with the choice to stop being a victim. So put yourself first. If this story meant something to you, please think about sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories about rediscovering your own strength. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for listening. And just a reminder, these stories are dramatized to explore real-life themes for thought and entertainment. If that's not your thing, no problem. Go find something that is. But if you're sticking around, I'm so very glad you're here.